Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rugby with Pads. I'm your host, Sam, and today we're going to be taking a look back at the mock drafts we've done over the last few weeks. Now, there's a lot to go over. I don't know how many exactly, but I'm not going to go over all of them in excruciating detail. But part of what I espouse in terms of why we do mock drafts, and I do a lot of them, is you need to go back and look at what went right and what went wrong. And that's what we're going to go and do today. We're going to take a critical look at all the mock drafts we've done over the past couple of weeks. We've had the whole week of mock draft episodes, and the other day you will have hopefully heard my home league's mock draft. I'm going to take a bit of a critical view on it and see what went right and what went wrong. We're doing a slightly different angle because somewhere over here, I think, if you're watching on YouTube, I just motioned to my right. We will be putting up all of the drafts as they went and the results of them. So wait and have a look and give me a feeling of how you thought they went. But let's start with what we started on at the end of last at the start of the first week. We did our auction draft, and the auction draft was interesting. It really was. It was a draft where I went in there a bit blind, and I had a semi kind of strategy that I wanted to achieve. But really, I just wanted to be exploring how other people value players, and it was a bit of an enlightening one. I don't think I had the best strategy early on. I think I probably overpaid for my running backs. Austin Eckler went for 61, but Jahmyr Gibbs went for 29. So out of my budget of 200, I believe it was, when you're spending 90 on two players, it leaves you lacking elsewhere. And in fact, I also spent 23 on Mixon, meant I was going heavy on running backs, especially when I only am allowed to play two in any 1 week. Obviously, I've got flex position. But, in terms of the players that I value all these guys quite highly. Where I potentially made a little bit of a mistake was drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think at that point, I was thinking, right, these top tier guys aren't going well. I had a plan to potentially look for Goff later on because he basically goes free, and I proposed him late on because everyone else was spending money on premium quarterbacks. Let's say they were spending in the 30s for the premium quarterbacks, which meant I mopped up in the middle rounds. But I think Amon-Ra St. Brown was probably an oversight, and if I'm going to be playing Gibbs, he's a bit of an insurance. So effectively, I played 57 on maybe playing one of those players each week. So that could have been definitely better spent elsewhere. I could have looked for a better wide receiver or a better running back, or a more or less expensive running back. I think Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery will be splitting reps, and they both have different reasons for being there. I like this stack with Goff and Gibbs, but Amon-Ra St. Brown somewhat dilutes it. Yeah, it was an interesting draft, but overall, I was happy with what I came out with for this draft. For those of you on audio, I've got it on the screen, but I paid. I'll run from the top. I paid $1 for Goff, Eckler 61, Jahmyr Gibbs 29, Amon-Ra St. Brown 28, DK Metcalf I think was a steal, and at the time of doing this, he was undervalued. I got him at 19. I got my tight end one, and I don't think it was a good tight end one, and that's maybe where I could have spent a bit more money earlier on. And Tyler Higbee with $1. I also got Mike Gesicki for another $1 as well. Joe Mixon for 23, DJ Moore for 13, Drake London for 15, Deontay Johnson, which was definitely a steal, for 2. And I look at the output projected, I don't think there's too much difference between Deontay Johnson and Amon St. Brown in my projections. Amon-Ra St. Brown probably more in the red zone, but when you're looking at the team makeup, that's where I maybe messed up. Samar JP Ryan for 2, just a bit of a throwaway, and Aaron Rodgers for $1 as a bit of an insurance case for Jared Goff. I think in this league, if I was to take this forward, I'd be looking to deal either Amon-Ra St. Brown or Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Jahmyr Gibbs would probably have more of a value in based on what he could be than Amon-Ra St. Brown. But it was a difficult one to pick up on, and I wasn't quite sure which way I would go on this one. But I'm generally happy with the results, and I think I'll potentially take a bit more of a dim view on paying up so early for someone who I really want. And I wanted to say I've got a little bit of a share of Eckler, even if it isn't a mock, because he did so well for me last year. But yeah, that was auction drafting. It's a very complex system, and it's something that maybe I will go in with a bit more research in. Also, it's incredibly time consuming. That is an episode that I did on a time lapse. So if you're going to be drafting and mock drafting on it, make sure you've got a good couple of hours free, because you're going to need to pay attention at all times. Because if you miss the player who's been put up on the block, who you really want, and you only have a minute to bid on him, it's going to be a very difficult time. But yeah, there are some wins here, and I think if I went and did it again now, wouldn't get DK Metcalf for quite as cheap. With the Mixon news, I probably wouldn't get him for quite as cheap. Elsewhere, I think everyone else that sits kind of, there might be a bit more hype around Aaron Rodgers, but you know what, quarterbacks in the late end of one QB auction draft generally go for quite low, and I think that's where I make my savings. Yeah, I think the strategy I took was to wait on a lot of players and try and snipe players who are slightly less interesting, and waiting for people to expend their money. So making sure that I could win it. If I knew someone needed a wide receiver and they only had $17, for example, I knew I could bid $19 and beat that person out. And that's what I did for DK Metcalf. But yeah, really interesting strategy. And yeah, definitely, I would like to enter a proper auction league one year. And we're actually thinking about making the League of Collusionary Gentlemen an auction league next year, as part of a keeper system, potentially. We'll have to see how that plays out. And it's definitely an interesting one if you're looking at any dynasty re-rolls. You keep some players, have some budget. It could be really interesting for you as well. So on Tuesday, we did a slightly different draft. It was more of the same in terms of kind of typical standards with regards to PPR, etc. What we focused on was a subject that I don't talk enough about, except when I do an hour and a half episode on the topic. But we wanted to talk about Dynasty and format in Dynasty that has become increasingly more popular, which is, of course, Superflex. Now, Superflex, for those of you who don't know, is where your flex position, which is normally wide receiver or running back, can be extended to any skill position. So that's including quarterback. So many of these are really considered to be 2 quarterback leagues. When it's a 2 quarterback league, your strategy changes massively, because you're not necessarily seeking out the Christian McCaffrey, the Justin Jefferson, the Austin Eckler. You need to make sure that you have that QB position locked down. QB normally will score anywhere between 18 and 30 points, depending on what your league format, whereas a good running back performance might be 15. Now, that small 3 points is a lot when you consider it extrapolates over 2 positions. And you're not going to get 2 great ones, so you need to make sure that you get at least 1 really good one and 1 that is serviceable. So that's what we did here. So yeah, the first round in a normal Superflex draft does have a spattering. And currently I'm in the middle of a Superflex best ball draft at the moment. And it does have a spattering of a bit of Justin Jefferson, a bit of CMC, etc. But really, people are going after those QBs first. And that's what we did here. So this is a Superflex dynasty. So we also had to consider age around this. And it was a difficult balance here, because I think if you're doing a dynasty startup, you shouldn't necessarily just think about age and go for the youngest of every single player, because it's really easy to hamstring yourself massively there. Instead, I think it's worthwhile going for a balance, but making sure you have prospects for the future later on. You need to win now with a core team, because no one's going to remember you if you don't win. In my only dynasty league I've got, and it's hard to get a dynasty league because it requires a multi-year commitment, whereas redraft is typically only 1 year. In my only experience in dynasty startups, I won the first year and then came last in the second year. But no one cares, because I won. My name is on the title. And if you follow these steps, it should be yours too. But no, I'm joking there. This is not an intense guide to this, but let's have a look at what we did here. Justin Herbert in the first, I think is great. I think I wasn't able to get the likes of Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. They were probably first 3. Probably Justin Jefferson splattered in there as well. And then Justin Herbert landed to me. Funnily enough, he was my number 7 pick in my dynasty startup about 3 years ago. I still think he holds a lot of weight. He's just got a big old new contract. And that's something you may want to consider about the contract status of some of your players in dynasty, more so than redraft, because you're potentially using them for multiple years. believe this was a 12-man based on where I've landed in these positions. Sorry, just closing the door behind you there. The ghosts are in the mix here. So this was a 12-man. So I ended up with the 8th pick there. Ended up with Josh Jacobs. Reasonably happy with that. Although this was done before some of the outrageous stuff that's been happening with running backs. But further down the line, because he's a bit older, I get a lot of value in Nick Chubb. So I'm thinking those two guys, if I can really go after it and go after it this year, that's a secure win there. And I ended up going for players who I thought would be advantageous at key onesie positions, and managing to get a secure slot in tight end with Kyle Pitts. He is 23 or something like that. He's got elite prospects, I think, and potentially people are waving on him because he's a bit too young. He hasn't been performing quite as well as maybe his draft capital should. But the first couple of years for a tight end are going to be hard. They're adjusting to what is a very difficult position in the game. He hasn't really had the coaching around him to make it really work. I think with Arthur Smith, it will work him into the game. I was less happy with my selection at wide receiver. So instead, I went for volume because I thought, here, this is not a position I can really be strong at. I didn't go for one of the main kind of Justin Jeffersons or anything like that early on. I wasn't able to secure myself a Chase or a Cup or someone like that. And in Dynasty, people like Cup really drop down because that age 30, it really does make a difference to people's perceptions of their value. But I think in terms of a win now scenario, this is okay. It's not great. I've got guys who could be a number one here and could make a decent contribution, but if not, their prospects are still good. Pittman, Ayuk, and Tony are, I'm looking at this and I'm not enjoying this anymore. I think at the time I was maybe on the back foot a little bit. I am pretty happy with my my second QB in Aaron Rodgers, and that was very much a win now pick in the 7th round. He's going to be around for a couple of years. He's a rental, but this is a case of, can I build a team to win me over the next couple of years? And I'm looking at this further, and I'm really not thinking this would be great. And maybe this is something that I really need to look at if I do a Dynasty Startup again this year. That although I'm trying to win at tight end and QB, I have sacrificed on wide receiver. And looking at this, 3 wide receivers in the mix, you need to be able to make sure you win that position. So not a great lineup here, and I probably this was a valuable thing to mock. I don't do it mocks on these kind of things particularly often, but you need to make sure that you are keeping an eye on these things and making sure you keep up with the times and have a strategy if you are thrown into these, because this is a team that you could be lumped with for multiple years, and it's very difficult to tear down and rebuild a team, which is something that, if you listen to the podcast, I've done recently. Now, if you were listening on Wednesday, which is something very different again, it was something that I don't think I've ever experienced and put me out of my comfort zone massively. It ended up being a randomizer draft with 3 QBs. Well, it was Superflex 2 QB. So 2 QB plus Superflex, which was crazy. So everything we just heard about Superflex, times that by at least 2, because you're having to really go after 3 different positions. 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 2 tight end, 1 flex, and a bunch of it ended up being a bunch of bench players who I had to balance out a little bit. But I probably like this draft more than I like my last draft, because it wasn't Dynasty, it was a redraft construct. I think I ended up making a bit more of a balanced go at it, and I ended up getting the 101. I went with Jalen Hurts. I think in any kind of Superflex format, he should be the number 101. He runs. If there's points per first down, he's definitely there. He's even more valuable. I think you need to look at your scoring system. Aaron Rodgers, for the same reason we just spoke about, he is very much a win now kind of guy. I think he's got to prove it. Josh Jacobs, given the right circumstances, is decent RB1, and Joe Mixon as well is great. I end up getting the stack with Devontae Smith as well, which I think is really important when you're looking at these kind of leagues where you have thin position groups. You want to make sure you maximize those number of points. And if it doesn't work, you can roll them out. It's I haven't gone for the heavy hitter of AJ Brown there. I don't think he would have been available in this, which is a 12-man draft. At the 3-1, no, he wouldn't have been available. He would have gone right at the end of the second, probably maybe to middle of the second, which is why I ended up with Josh Jacobs, and I made sure that I did secure running back and wide receiver. And this ended up going QB, running back, wide receiver, QB, running back. I think I then went wide receiver again. I then maybe went QB again because I had to have 3 QBs because it was getting quite sparse towards the end. And my third QB being Matt Stafford. He's someone I actually like this year. I think a lot of people have something against him, but you've got to follow the money. He is due, I think his cap hit, and you can look in what cap hit means, etc. His cap hit is like 50 million this year, and it's the same next year. They've got to go in on him. They have no choice, and I don't think they want to waste the best year of Sean McVay's coaching career playing someone who doesn't want to play. I think he wants to play. I think he wants to be there. Yeah, he's got a weird contract, but he's going to do well. It was also a 2 tight end, which is a construct I've not really played before, and I've done a couple of leagues in it this year in best ball, and the zombie draft will be 2 tight end as well. And it really put the cat amongst pigeons because you've got to balance on 4 different fronts here. You've got to balance on QB, you've got to balance on running back, you've got to balance on wide receiver, tight end, and any of your super flex and flex positions as well. And I ended up with Darren Waller and Evan Engram. Really happy with those in the middle of rounds, 7 and 8. Picked a little bit further after each other because they end up being separated. Really happy with Darren Waller in the 7th because he is, for me, the wide receiver 1 of the Giants. Evan Engram could end up being the possession guy for the Jacksonville Jaguars as well. I would have loved to have gotten this stack with Trevor Lawrence, but unfortunately didn't manage to get that. But overall, I think this is a pretty sound team. Really happy with how it worked out, and it did throw up a few question marks. I ended up going with a 4th QB in Sam Howell late on. I think people make a lot about with 2 QBs going, or Superflex going for that 3rd QB early. I'm against it. Now, I say that from a position of advantage. In my Dynasty Superflex, I have got Herbert and Aaron Rodgers. I've got Desmond Ridder sitting on the bench. I'm happy to give him up. I'm potentially looking at Deshaun Watson. He's on the open market because he was suspended from our league for a year as well. But you don't always have to have that 3rd QB because it wastes a roster spot and elsewhere you might need. And especially in a league like this where I've got 7 other skill positions I've got to fill and only 5 bench spots, it was really important to make sure that I had filled all those spots, and then I considered it. Sam Howell was a bonus for me, but really could have gotten someone better and earlier. I got Sky Moore straight after that, so that was the kind of the level I was dealing with. But the bench being Devon A.K.A, which really happy with. Sam Howell, Sky Moore, Mike Gesicki. I did get another tight end because there are 3, potentially 2+ tight ends you can use here, and Van Jefferson in the end. It would be weird if this was actually a league, and I'd be interested to see it come out like that. But I think the things I learned here were, what did I learn here? 2 tight end is difficult, and it's difficult to fight on all fronts, but it can be done. I think where I sacrificed here was my bench depth. I would have loved to have another marquee wide receiver on the bench. I like having the extra players there. Devon A.K.A is a massive gamble. Sky Moore is a gamble. So those wide receiver and running back slots don't really have backup outside of Cortland Sutton, which I think is less of a gamble. I do like him a little bit more. But I ended up having to get just par, maybe subpar backups for all of this key skill positions because there were so many of them. It was really interesting, and it meant because it was 12 man, it was quite shallow as well. So although I don't feel comfortable in this in isolation, I think if I compared it to the other teams, I'd be pretty happy with it. But don't try and fight things on all fronts is maybe the lesson here. On Thursday, we had 2 drafts. Not just 1, 2 drafts. Well, technically, we had 1 draft where it was 2 of us doing. So I'm going to analyse both. And I'm going to analyse mine versus John. So, I'm going to try and position myself a bit more in the middle of the screen. I'm going to go a little bit here, and hopefully you can see them either side of me. Let's start with mine over here. Yeah, I'm Rugby with Pads, if you didn't know already. and John, who really welcome back on the pod anytime, come along, and you can come and have another go at this. But we went head to head, and the chaos part of it was us really trying to tear bits out of each other a little bit, but we were actually maybe nicer than we should have. We took a bit of inspiration from the fantasy footballers, had a wheel of doom, chaos effectively, that made decisions that we wouldn't have necessarily made had it's been an actual draft that we want to take forward. And it forces into some difficult situations. Overall, I think the ones where I was forced to make changes and not draft players. I don't think I was allowed to draft a tight end where I wanted to, so I ended up with Tyler Higbee. I was made to draft Jared Goff at a point, I think, because I had to go back-to-back same player. I think it was a team wheel one as well. Go back and watch the episode. It was interesting, but the confines of what it was a 12-man again. I started out with Bijan Robinson, went back-to-back with Josh Jacobs. I thought running back. That was it. John made me go running back early on, and I wasn't allowed to pick. And I was made to pick another running back, so I had to go Jahmyr Gibbs in the third round. So I think that was my punishment at that point. That meant I was really fighting to find players who would be fantastic wide receivers. And in PPR, I rate fantastic wide receivers who are possession guys much more than I do running backs. Running backs with volume, great. And I think I've got 3 guys who I think can do a job here, but yeah, they weren't maybe the ideal picks. And given the chance, what I would do differently if I wasn't forced to do things. In the third round, I would have picked up probably a better wide receiver and had DJ Moore as my second, rather than Brandon Ayuk as my second in the 6th round. Jahmyr Gibbs is incredible value, and I would have wanted to have him, but as a flex, there are better players, and probably as a flex, I might even play Deontay Johnson here based on the fact I'm actually increasing on him, and Javonte Williams is no slouch. It also means I would have been able to advance my efforts to get a tight end better than Tyler Higbee, although I'm in a 2 tight end best ball draft at the moment, and Tyler Higbee is my number 1 by choice. I'm going for a deep strategy, So the run here: QB Aaron Rodgers, running backs Bijan and Josh Jacobs, wide receiver DJ Moore and Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Higbee, Jahmyr Gibbs, and on the bench Javonte Williams, Deontay Johnson, Gabe Davis, and Jared Goff. I think it's a pretty good lineup. Don't know about you. I probably wouldn't have gone for another QB. I ended up going QB back-to-back in the late rounds there. Not something I like doing there. I was forced to take a tight end really late, which again sucked a little bit. I think that was because we decided we'd already used up our chaos points, and we decided to do one last chaos, and I was forced to make tight end then, which is something I needed to do anyway. But yeah, I maybe would have rather gone in without anyone, and could have picked Tyler Higbee up off the waiver wire at that point. John, on the other hand, was dealt maybe a worse hand. It'll be on this side, sorry. I'm just waving my hands for the YouTube audience here. Miles Sanders was forced on the wheel of teams in the 2nd round, so he had to pick a Panther, which was probably one of the worst picks you could have made. He started off strong with Cooper Kupp. I really like that. Miles Sanders came next. Najee Harris after that. Amari Cooper. Again, these are all decisions I probably agree with. I don't think the running back room is particularly strong, and maybe I would have hunted even further on the running back room and gone 0 RB for him, and maybe picked up a stronger wide receiver in the 3rd than Amari Cooper, who if Deshaun Watson is who he was, he'll be okay. But I'm not sure if Deshaun Watson actually is. Trevor Lawrence in the 6th, I think, is a solid pickup, but I don't believe he picked up another wide receiver, another quarterback, which is something that I agree with. If you're drafting highly on a quarterback, you do not want to draft a second one because it's just going to damage your team elsewhere. He was in a similar situation with me, waited for tight end. I think again he was forced. I think he was forced to take DeAndre Swift at one point, which is not a pick that I would force anyone to make willingly. Anyway, that's the wheels choice. Questionable one and Zach Charbonnet later. Mike Evans, I think, is great. I think he would probably slot in similarly to Amari Cooper. He's been the wide receiver, average wide receiver 12 over the last 7 years, and he's now the wide receiver 30 something. Crazy. I think Cortland Sutton is great, and Elijah Mitchell, I think, was something he was forced to do. He was forced to pick another one, a back-to-back position or something like that. But yeah, I think if you compare the two, I can't really tell much apart because in isolation, I don't think either of us would want these teams. They both have the weaknesses. On my side, the weakness is wide receiver, tight end, flex. On his side, the weakness is definitely running back, and maybe some depth. Arguably, we've got very similar quarterback standards because I do think Aaron Rodgers is better than advertised in the 9th round. I think people are just crazy over the prospect of Trevor Lawrence. But yeah, it was an interesting one, and I'm not really sure what we learned from it. I did jot down a few things about what we learned, but this one was more difficult because we were forced into some weird and wonderful things. And You know what? I think maybe the main take home is make sure you have a plan B, because if the chaos wheel was meant to simulate if someone snipes you or just gets ahead of your pick or something like that, what do you actually do and what can you do? So I think it's always worthwhile having a plan B in your back pocket just to make sure that you're prepared for any eventuality. Right, we're going to take a little break there because we are well over halfway through the initial week, but we did extend it a little bit, so we will go over that shortly. But we'll join you on the other side, and you might hear a little thing from our sponsors, i.e., me. Welcome back, everybody. And on Friday, we had another interesting one, but interesting for different reasons. And what I did is not apply myself with any constraints. I did something by the book. And you know what? Look at this lineup. I'm just going to wave it over here. Keep forgetting it's all mirrored on on YouTube here. For the audio listeners, this was a really, really fun exercise to do because I really stuck quite rigidly to my tier structure, and it forced me to analyze my tiers themselves. And I've since then changed them, but I'm still really happy with what turned out. I got the 5th slot, and I started out with Austin Eckler. Really happy with that. Ended up with Josh Jacobs. There's a bit of a running theme about when I did this. I think I was quite high on Josh Jacobs. Had it not been him, could I have gone with someone else? Yeah, probably. If Saquon Barkley had dropped, sometimes Chubb drops up early. Maybe I would have gone early on Mixon these days. I don't know, but Mixon is that kind of opportunity balance. Jameer Gibbs at that range would have been fine as well. But I stuck rigidly with that, and I saw value in those players because the players in other tiers had dropped or had gone. So I saw, right, okay, well, I still have the last break of my running back tier, and I'm going to stick with that. Then went with Keenan Allen, looped back to Lamar Jackson, who was the last of my kind of really elite quarterbacks, paired him with DJ Moore. And yeah, those top 5, super happy with them. I ended up going to Brandon Ayuk as my flex, Evan Ingram next, and then filling out the squad with Antonio Gibson, Gabe Davis, Chigga, Zeke Elliott, and Van Jefferson later on. You know what? I can't poke any flaws in this. And I think maybe the take home, and I'm not going to spend much more time on this. So, running through Lamar Jackson, Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Evan Ingram, Brandon Ayuk, Antonio Gibson, Gabe Davis, Chigga, Zeke Elliott, Van Jefferson. It's a brilliant mix of this was perfect for me. In a PPR system, this would be perfect. Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, I think are going to be, and Evan Ingram going to be really target hungry. Brandon Ayuk could potentially be the target leader over there in San Francisco. Maybe competing with Debo there, but they're going to run it a lot. So you just want players who can be great. Gabe Davis is a fantastic number 2, and I think in certain game situations would be great. Antonio Gibson has a lot of hype in camp. This works for me. And Lamar Jackson's going to be throwing a lot. I think his value actually goes up because it means that I think when he does scramble, he'll be scrambling for more, and it'll be a bit more of a surprise. So yeah, this lineup, I cannot complain about it, and I cannot really poke holes in it. And I think there may be the take home message is this was from tiers that I made in the IDK. The IDK is available on www.rugbywithpads.com to any member. From a single £1 you can get access to it. I will send it to you with my updated tiers, and you can make your own tier makers. You can change things. It's all editable. It's all up to you, providing you have a Google Sheets license, which everyone can have with a Gmail account, or an Excel license. You're more than capable of doing it yourself as well. It's not a sophisticated tool, but what it did was really hone my thoughts. And rather than doing it off the cuff, which is something that I try and build in the tiers in my mind, I actually went through the process of deleting things and going through it. And you know what? It is a far better result for it. So I think it's maybe the take-home message is draft in tiers, and you will not be surprised by the outcome. On Saturday, we continued the fun, and on the theme of the IDK, which introduced in last segment, we looked at using the guided feature. So what I've done is I've created a bunch of optimal pathways for various different scenarios, whether they be champion wide receiver, robust running back, or in this case 0RB. And I did a 0RB, which is not something that I typically tend to do because I feel uncomfortable with it. But I did it. I waited till the 5th round, and I liked it. I ended up with a 101 and a 12 man, so I started off with Justin Jefferson, happy with that. Number 2 went Mark Andrews, because I think if you're going 0 RB, you want to win at another position. Always win when you're losing. Followed by Chris Olave. So, Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, if there was a keeper league, you'd be laughing. I then went to DJ Moore at the end of the 4th round, and only finally at the 5th round went Dameon Pierce to round out my or to start my running back room. And he is probably the last of the volume guys you want. I think if you can't get flashy guys who are going to pick up the ball a lot, you want a volume guy. Dameon Pierce is your volume guy. They're going to run it a lot, especially with a rookie quarterback under center. I then went back to back with Alvin Kamara, who is only suspended for 3 games. I thought he was still, he's got talent there, and backed up with maybe a bit of a volume play as well, and he has the opportunity to get good in AJ Dillon. Brian Robinson was next. Then I went for volume on the number of players. Samaje Perine, followed by Jared Goff as my QB1. I think if you're going running back, 0 running back, you need to wait on the QB because you cannot fight on all fronts. There's a message that is still there. And then finally, Kendra Miller to back up Alvin Kamara. Some of these guys are going to be throwaway. And finally, Van Jefferson. So, not going really heavy on wide receiver there, because out of those 3 wide receivers, they're probably not going to come out of my lineup because I waited on running back. Got 3 potentially legit wide receiver 1s there, who could all be in the top 15 finishers. I think you probably got 2 top 10s and maybe a top 20 the guy there. Guys like AJ Dillon as well and Brian Robinson, I think, are only an injury away or a bit of hot hand form from becoming running back 1 relevant as well. So I think with 0 RB, the strategy is you maybe take a few licks early on, but you position yourself to pick up someone and either have great waiver wire priority or be patient with your fab budget. You have to pick up someone or have one of the guys you drafted in volume take over the position. So AJ Dillon, for example, could take over the position from Aaron Jones, Brian Robinson or he could become the dominant one out of him and who it is, Antonio Gibson. Samaje Perine could well benefit from the injury form of Javonte Williams, and Kendra Miller maybe now so less valuable now they've got Kareem Hunt. But the concept is there. You potentially want to wait on some of these guys. If it doesn't work out, throw them away and go again, because you have won at a tight end position. You've won at the wide receiver position in multiple formats. And I think it's only viable. It's definitely a legit option this year because there are scarce good running backs. You're very rarely going to come away with 2 really good running backs. But you can come away with 3 or 4 good pass catches, and that's what we'd have here. In 3 wide receiver teams, I think this format is even better. So, the take-home message here is that zero. Can't say my words now. 0 RB is definitely legit, and look for other ways to boost your spot starters. Whether it be by stacks, I haven't got any stacks here, but that's probably what I would have wanted to do. But make sure you try and own at least one other position. And this one, wide receiver, potentially tight end, getting the number 2/3 guy there is a fantastic opportunity. But you own those, you don't have to go deep on those. So you can go deep. And when I talk deep, go volume of guys who can be instantly replaceable should your first choices not work out. Those are kind of strategies that I would take in 0 RB. Right, we're going to take another quick break, very quick here, because on the other side, we're going to take another trip back with John, where we drafted each other's lineups. So, as promised, we are going to look at another double draft. This is another one that I did with John. It was a bit of a silly one, really, that we did at the end of our recording session for our Chaos draft. But we actually looked at doing I think we called it Reverso draft or Uno Reverse draft. You'll have to go back and have a look there. But effectively what we did is we drafted each other's teams in our League of Record. We'll get onto the home leagues and League of Record in a minute in the next segments. But yeah, this was a really interesting piece that we did. And it was interesting seeing John's value on my team versus my own. Now you'll see over here we'll have my team, and over here we'll have John's team. So I'll just position again so I can get between the 2 here. This will all look great in post, and for your audio listeners, have a look on YouTube for this kind of stuff. It works out pretty well. for my team, which is John's team, he he wanted to take. This is a keeper league, so he took Jalen Hurts in the 5th round. I think it's a great value. He normally goes in the 3rd. It makes sure you have a elite elite QB, not an RB. For my team, which John drafted, I have Justin Fields in the 15th, so in the last round. So it works out pretty well. I got similar value, but maybe more value than John did because I'm maybe jumping 10 plus, and I don't have to think about running back early. But we'll go through. And for my team that John drafted on this side, John started out. It was an interesting one. You know what? It was interesting. John started out. How can I describe how he started out? Well, I had the last pick, which doesn't really help. But he started out with Stephon Diggs, which is a pick that I probably would go for. I do like that a lot. Then went Nick Chubb, again, a pick I do like. Keenan Allen, I like that as well. Rounding out the wide receiver room, it's a half PPR league, so possession receivers are really useful. Then went for Travis Etienne as someone I look at the board. Then there was still Mixon on the board. I would have gone for someone else, and then followed up with Cam Akers, who I don't think, based on how the draft went, that's 2 out of the 3 core running backs who are a bit risky. And then went with David Montgomery and Rashard Penny. There was all risk there. Damian Harris. There wasn't a consistent starter there. I am a big proponent of having 2 out of your 3 players being consistent. And what we didn't have is any level of consistency there. But that's just the way I would have done it. He did get me Kyle Pitts, which we talked about earlier. I think it's an interesting one. I think he's better in Dynasty than others. There was Goddard and who else was available? Engram was available, who in this format I probably would have gone over. There was also Waller, who I think is the wide receiver 1 in that setup. Yeah, he did everything that he needed to, and there was maybe some suspect decisions later on that I wouldn't have made, but it was interesting to see how John balanced the team. He did make a faux pas, in my opinion, going for Aaron Rodgers in the 12th when there was still value to be had at running back and wide receiver, but he made that, and I'm a big proponent. I've said this already today, that if you've got a 1 QB in a 1 QB league, you don't need the second. You don't need to just roster one for the sake of it. For John's team over there, he started off with Jalen Hurts, so I made a beeline for AJ Brown in the 1st. I thought you need to have that stack. I think that's really valuable. Derrick Henry and Miles Sanders, the 2nd and 4th round, sandwiched with DK Metcalf. I think all 4 of those consistent performers. I think Miles Sanders will be a volume guy. He will regress on the touchdowns a little bit this year, but I think he'll probably be more involved in the passing and overall yardage game if they're semi-good. I then went with my less reliable player, Mike Williams, who's going to be a boom-bust guy. Alvin Kamara, boom-bust. Again, Rashad White, maybe a bit more floor. And played around with Michael Thomas, Cortland Sutton, Kendra Miller. I quite often found myself at this time drafting Alvin Kamara and Kendra Miller as, because we didn't know how long he'd be out. I'm maybe doing the same now with Alvin Kamara and Kareem Hunt. That's an assumption these days. So, yeah, the team was really balanced, in my opinion. I'd like to know who you thought was better. So John's team for me would have been Justin Fields. I'm going to bring him up from the top to the bottom. Nick Chubb, Travis Etienne, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Kyle Pitts, Cam Akers, Carlson, the Jets, and we won't go over the bench players, but the highlight is probably Gabe Davis there in that mix, and Aaron Rodgers, of course. John's team that I drafted: Jalen Hurts, Derrick Henry, Miles Sanders, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Evan Ingram, Mike Williams, Justin Tucker, and Dallas Cowboys. And I went early on those guys to make sure I secured the top 2, who I do think are going to be a cut above the rest. And the highlights in the bench: Alvin Kamara and probably Rashad White there. Maybe Michael Thomas is a bit one. I personally think, based on the fact that John was drafting it, John's team gets to draft 3 positions up. He's always going to have advantage over me. So it's interesting drafting with someone and seeing what he thinks I would draft and what I think he would draft, or what I should draft. I think he's going to end up with a better side than me. I'm going to have to work really hard to make sure I take advantage of having a 15th round draft pick there. But let me know what you think. Which one would you rather have? So we're going to jump back into our final 3 mocks that we did over this last week. We had a little bit of a break after a week full of drafts, and came back a couple of weeks after recording, actually, funnily enough. And we looked at our home leagues. So we did them in a group of three. The home leagues that I'm going to talk about mainly outside of Dynasty, which we've done it to death, that we need redrafting this year, are going to be my League of Record, which is the best league by far. Thanks to John for that lovely title. That's lasted for a little while. We've got the League of Collusionary Gentlemen, which is the beginner league that started last year, and the Zombie League, which is going to be a bigger 18-man, hopefully, league that we're going to be driving and building some storylines behind. If you're still interested in joining that, there is still time as well. So let's start with the home league draft. Now, we've already done the reverse of this and let John pick it. So I made some different choices to John. As you can see, I didn't draft another QB. I had Justin Fields as my keeper in the 15th, and then I ended up just driving value wherever I could. In the first round, who did I pick up? I picked up Davante Adams at the end of the first round. I think he's never been out of the top guys, no matter who he's got, whether he's got Jimmy G, he's going to have Jimmy G, whether he's got Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr. It didn't make a blind bit of difference. He just changed his game. He is just that good. And even though he's a little bit older, I think he's going to be great. I paired him with Nick Chubb because I think the range of outcomes for Davante Adams could flex a little bit. So I wanted someone who was going to be more consistent. And I went by that kind of rhythm, going wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, running back for the next couple of rounds. I ended up with my first 4 picks as being, as mentioned, Davante Adams, Nick Chubb, DK Metcalf, and then Joe Mixon in the 4th. Joe Mixon being someone who I think is going to be fantastic. And if you are in a points per first down league, he's great at breaking the plane. So I definitely go for him. I then ended up going for someone who I thought could be a number one in the system, who just seemed to jump up a little bit of value, and Drake London in the flex. Bearing in mind this is a half PPR league, so you need to really have someone who's going to be scoring lots of touchdowns to make them relevant. I think Drake London really showed something, and you always talk about these second-year breakouts. I then continued to build my bench, Chris Godwin, AJ Dillon, who I'm warming up on. I'm not a huge fan of Aaron Jones, but I think AJ Dillon, 4 rounds plus later, I think could be really good value because they didn't actually finish that too far apart, especially on a points per game basis or points per snap basis for definite. Deontay Johnson, it just continues to drop. I think because people have gone away from him due to lack of touchdown proficiency last year. I think he will be better. Khalil Herbert, I think, is going to be a massive value. And at 9th round, you're not worried. And I ended up picking my first tight end up, who in this league, it's not hugely warranted to need a good tight end. It's one tight end. You can't use them in the flex as well. So I normally just go with one. I end up going with 2. Going back to back with Evan Ingram and Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet is that stack player because I do like to have at least one stack in all my teams. And then finally, Jerick McKinnon, and filling out the rest of the team with my early, because I've gone 15th round with my keeper, I was able to go with my special teams players, Dallas Cowboys and Justin Tucker, considerably earlier. So this is probably going to be a very similar team that I actually draft. Outside of, I know how I've drafted with these guys for 7 years. Outside of potentially a couple of wonky first round picks, I think this is going to be the way that it goes. One of my players I play against is a massive Seahawks fan, so might go DK Metcalf early. I don't know. I think I'm probably drafting him slightly above ADP anyway, so he's not going to appear on these lists. And at the moment, I think we're drafting this in the NFL Fantasy app. This might change to Sleeper. If it changes to Sleeper, I think it's more going to be similar to this. I might have a chance of going for this. I think I'll have more value if we go in the NFL Fantasy app, simply because all the ADPs are a bit wonky. Like Mixon is way down in like the 7th or something like that. So you can wait on him, and he could be a third RB and be massive value. So maybe that's something to consider. Actually, always think about drafting inside. I do all my mock drafting, or predominantly do my mock drafting within the confines of Sleeper. I think it's a really good app, but if you're drafting on a certain platform, make sure you know what it's like. It's a small tip that you should be picking up anyway, but make sure you know what it's like and what the ADPs are going to be like for that particular platform. The League of Collusionary Gentlemen is a bit of a different beast. It's a slightly bigger league. It's 12 man. what we tried to do in this one, actually, no, it's 14 man this year. So it's bigger than it was last year. It went from 8 to 14, and we've got a bunch of new players. I think 3 of them are existing players, 3 of them are brand new as well. So we've got a range of experience across the board. I am drafting last. It was a lottery draft, and there's no keepers. So, but I ended up going for very much the same players. My first 3 picks at the end of that draft, and this is a third round reversal as well, so that it chunks up a little bit. So I ended up reaching for Joe Mixon quite a lot. I ended up going Devontae Adams, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon in my first 3 picks, and ended up with Trevor Lawrence as my next one. We're doing some small amounts of points per first down on this one. It doesn't relate to the quarterback, but because it's only 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, I don't need to have a huge amount of depth on there, and the flex position is very flexible. I do want, and I probably will go for something like this if I don't think he will be available, because I think when you're playing with new players, they tend to favour going for quarterbacks a bit earlier as a bit of a comfort. I set and forget that position; they don't have to stream it. Whereas I'm a bit more comfortable going late and streaming players, working the waiver wire, all of that fun stuff. In the end, I ended up kicking down a little bit on wide receiver, just because there is I think there's a wide receiver dead zone and players that I won't personally pick. But I picked up Chris Godwin in the 5th, who I think is a good value. Evan Engram, you can tell the difference in the 14-man to a 10-man league. I picked up Evan Engram in the 10th in the other league. I ended up picking him in the 6th in this league, because you've got to consider the size of your pool here and how ADP changes. And when they might seem good value in one format, albeit it's good value in another format. But Evan Engram, I picked him up for that stack, and that was something that I was hyper targeting in this one, because there is going to be scarcity in the waiver market. We're going to have to do lots more trading, and it was quite a trade heavy league last year. I thought that was quite a good pick up early on to make sure I had a stack, to make sure that kind of tandem is hopefully set. Gabe Davis jumps up from, he's normally a 10th or 11th round pick. I got him in the 7th. And then followed by I end up filling up my draft board pretty directly, because I had addressed every position, because it's quite an even split. It's not something I would normally do. I'd probably look to find more value in one particular position, but I've gone for more of an even build here. Devon A. Kane, Jameson Williams came up, who I think could be a really good value later on if you can get him on your bench as a wide receiver 4, effectively. Zeke Elliott, who's a throwaway pick. Jared Goff, again, a bit of a throwaway pick. I just picked up the best value. Mike Gesicki in the 14th, and my defense and kicker were the Pittsburgh Steelers and Jake Moody. I don't think it's probably representative, and I think, again, this might be something that, funnily enough, as of recording this, in a couple of hours, I am going to be doing a draft with other people who are in the league. So it might be more representative of what might actually happen in this. So, but if I go with something like this, I think the thing that I've learned here is maybe I'd reach for Trevor Lawrence. I could have gone later and gone for, I'm trying to think who. You know what? I would have been happy leading off with Jared Goff as my number 1. I think the tier breaks between quarterbacks, once you get past the elite guys, are very small. So you don't have to worry too much about leaning on someone like Jared Goff or Geno Smith. Geno Smith would have been great if I picked up DK Metcalf. Jimmy G is a bit of a push. I think Jimmy G is a bit too far down. I don't think there's much more value elsewhere. There weren't money options for stacks, but I have got that Jared Goff, Jameson Williams potential stack after week 6. We'll see how that goes down. But this would be an interesting league, and it'd be quite enlightening to see today what people actually do with their drafts. I think they're wanting to do a draft as well, to just make sure that they've got the format, but maybe also just to pick on. Maybe this is my hubris coming in, but maybe pick on me and see what I'm going to be doing, so they can counter it a little bit. Finally, we have the zombie draft, and zombie draft was really interesting because you have to think of it completely differently. The zombie draft is a bit like an eliminator, but you don't get eliminated, you become a zombie. When you become a zombie, I've talked about this before, you lose all of your players. You lose half your fab, and you have to rebuild your squad. And the idea is that zombies have to work together to kill or convert more humans by having one or more of them beat one of the human players, and humans have to exist. They trade amongst each other, etc., to make sure they survive as a pack. But ultimately, only 1 or 2 can survive and get to the helicopter. There's a whole story behind it. This was a challenging one, and I got the number 3 pick on this one. I don't know what I'm going to get because it's going to be completely random on the day. So this is probably the least representative of the home drafts. But in the way I've got to think about it, it's 1 QB, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, which is a format that I really like because it really challenges people to balance their teams. 2 flex positions, which is wide receiver, running back, tight end, and 1 bench position. Only 1. So yeah, you're not drafting 2 QBs. You can't go on the defensive. You've got to fill out your lineup, and this is again completely going counter. This is why I like this format. It completely goes counter against all of your traditional draft methodologies. I ended up starting off 103 Travis Kelce. I'm so happy with that, and it set myself up so well because Travis Kelce as a pick is like picking a tight end and a wide receiver. Yeah, he's like having a tight end 1 and a wide receiver 2 in 1. So I could punt on other positions as well. Jahmyr Gibbs came up next, Justin Fields, because I needed a good wide receiver, a good quarterback who I thought I could play. I was targeting another player as well in the 4th, but I ended up getting DeAndre Hopkins at value, I think. And old school wide receiver 1 who I think could do some damage, and I think they will work it towards him early on because they want to make sure their investment, or it's a huge amount of investment, is warranted, and they're not just a one-dimensional team going through Derrick Henry. Deontay Johnson came up in the 5th. I've already talked about his value. I think that was great. And who else did I pick up? So in the 5th, I got him. 6th, I ended up having to go with another tight end. So you see what I'm doing here. I'm filling out my team because there was a bit of a wide running back dead zone. I ended up going back for Khalil Herbert in the 7th to fill out that position. Romeo Dobbs and Mike Gesicki were 2 guys who I think could have a little bit of value early on, especially if you're trying to work in players. Romeo Dobbs seems to be a safe pair of hands. I think he'll be more in the slot than Christian Watson, who's going to be more boom bust. And in this, you don't need to be the top guy. You just need to not be the bottom guy, and that's what will help you survive. And finally, Van Jefferson. I picked him up as my final pick. I really liked this draft. I think it was really damn good. I don't know what you guys think, but I think going into week 1, there isn't a player there outside of Adam Thielen who I was a bit unsure about because he's tied to a rookie quarterback who I thought can't do some damage and can't be useful for this team. So yeah, I think it's interesting, but it'll be interesting to see on the day, and maybe for once I won't be picking from the final spot in one of my home leagues. But that's it for the drafts. We'll take a little break now, and we'll come back on the other side, and we'll think about some of the things we learned and just some of the takeaway messages. I think I've got 10 distilled things that I can talk about. But yeah, I'll see you shortly on the other side. Right, and we're back, and well done to anyone who's made it this far. Really appreciate it. Finally, we're going to take a look at some takeaways, and I looked at each one and made some notes about this, but I kind of distilled it into 10 points. And this is not a draft 103. This is just some tidbits and knowledge sharing that I wanted to provide for all of you. So we'll get through it, and then we'll let you get about your day, because I know you've listened to me rattle on probably far too long. I wanted this to be a short episode. It is definitely not. So number 1, I think I learned this in the first draft that we showed here in the auction draft. I think it's wise to make sure to be careful to watch out for stacks that cancel each other out. The example that I used was Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jahmyr Gibbs, but there are plenty of other opportunities to mess yourself up. You could very easily take Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and Dallas Goedert. Those kind of cancel each other out a little bit, because any given week, if you're not doing best ball, and best ball is a different matter, you're having to make a choice of which guy is going to maximize your points with your quarterback. But number 2, stacks are your best friend in best ball. Any kind of stacks, they can massively elevate a fringe player. And with best ball, they're just going to play the guys in those weeks who are going to play. And I'll take, for example, Jimmy G. So he is going to throw the ball to Devontae Adams, but you've probably paid up a lot for Devontae Adams. If you can get Jimmy G later on, the Devontae Adams, Jimmy G thing elevates him massively. If you're in a really deep draft, and I'm in a really deep draft for best ball elsewhere, I have punted on tight end to no end, but I'm using my last 5 picks on tight end, and I'm thinking about my quarterbacks. Who have I got? I think I've got Justin Herbert, and I've got Jimmy G, and someone else could. I can't remember who it is exactly, but for those guys, I'm targeting people like Donald Parham. Donald Parham could pop up with a couple of things, and if he's my fourth or fifth tight end in a best ball, I think that's a really good value because he could elevate. He could be massively elevated by the potency of Justin Herbert. Likewise, Austin Hooper or Michael Mayer, they're way down there. They're sometimes not even drafted. I went through and I set up a list of 22 tight ends that probably aren't on anyone's radar who I think could have a lot of value on best ball. It'd be really interesting next year to look at best ball in a different light. Look at really, really deep players. Those are really, really good values who could win you a week. Yeah, and it's all done via stacks. On their own, they're not useful. But when you combine them with the 6 points that you're going to get from your quarterback, that's where they can have a lot of value. Pivoting a little bit, number 3 is in Dynasty, I think it's the plan to aim to win now. Do not focus too much on age. If you're in a startup, make sure you have a team that is going to be competitive. Yes, you want to make sure you're not saddled with something that's going to be dump for 3 years. But if you can aim to win first year and be competitive, you can always rebuild. If you're close to the top, you can tweak, and if you end up coming dead last, it's fine. You've got veterans who will be assets on other people's teams, and you can use the trade and build something that you find is fun. Dynasty is a really interesting and engaging format, but it's really difficult if you're doing badly. I really disengaged last year when I was doing badly. I re-looked at it a little bit, and I'm aiming to do something a little bit different on it. But I would say if you're in a startup, don't focus too much on age. Focus on production, because contracts tied with age is where you really, really find the difficulty in finding the value. I think is going to be really key. In all draft styles, and this is number 4, you can't fight on all fronts though. You're going to have to choose how you're going to build it. Are you going for robust running back? If you're doing that, you're going to have to sacrifice elsewhere. If you try and get the best QB, the best running back, the best wide receiver, the best tight end, you're going to end up not getting any of them, and you're just going to end up getting average guys, and average guys do not win leagues. Fantasy football is a balance of risk and reward. You need to risk hunting on a position to make sure you win or are competitive at others. And I think with that as well, if you start making bad decisions, and this is number 5, you made a bad pick, don't worry. You can drafts are long things, unless they're 15-second picks, which no one really does. They go on for a while, and that you're going to pick up players who you won't play. Inevitably, you're going to pick up players after week 1. You realise they're rubbish. I'm going to get rid. Rally. Don't get tilted. Stick with your guidance. Make sure you have a plan B, and don't rush to do something that you don't want to do. Number 6 is if you go 0 RB, which I think is a legitimate strategy this year, make sure you win at least one other position. If you've got multiple tight ends or multiple QBs, win at those positions. Hunter RB, but make sure you commit, but not too far. I think for 0 RB, the 6th, 7th round is when you pop back up is probably a good idea, because you've probably got enough good players in other positions to make it worthwhile coming back into the market. If you're going 0 wide receiver, you can probably leave it another. You probably want to pick up one good wide receiver by the 5th round, I would say, but then you can pick up your 2nd and 3rd in the 7th and 8th and have good value there still. Number 7 is if you're in a single QB league, if you have an elite QB, as in one of the top 10, let's say like the top 8 to top 10, don't bother picking up a backup just for bye weeks. It just wastes a roster spot. There is plenty of others, and you'll end up dropping him. If you've got Patrick Mahomes, why bother picking up Jared Goff? You're not going to play him. You're going to play Patrick Mahomes week in, week out. And the week you don't, you're probably fine to lose because you've won a load of others. But number 8 here is if you're in a 2 QB league, Superflex, QB in the 1st, the 3rd or 4th round is a necessity to compete. It's a completely different style. Practice, practice, practice. And I did a couple of those. Make sure you understand what you need to do. And talking of understanding and practice in general, which is my top 101 and 102 picks, practice, practice, practice. Number 9 here in my kind of little tips and tricks is make sure you understand the rules and the effects on player prospects. Now, what I mean by that is points per first down is really important. A lot more leagues are using it because they show the effectiveness of players. So players like Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, who are going to be churners, going to get those 5 yards to get that first down on 3rd and 2. Really, really important to play those guys. If you're in an eliminator league, you need to make sure you understand what the prospects are of what your first week's results are versus second, etc. If you're doing median scoring or first past the post, not fast first post, that's a political term, but top scoring rating, and it's not head to head. You need to understand these because it does change the outlook of players and changes not just the sort of scoring systems like points per first down or points per reception, etc., but how the league is set up is really important. I'm in lots of best ball leagues, which is just highest points scored. I've created a best ball league, which is actually head to head, which I think is really interesting because it still builds a little bit of competitiveness, even though you're not touching that league. But I'm drafting them very differently. Number 10 is, and the final point, this game's fun. I've devoted a huge chunk of my time and effort into this, but this game is fun. And as such, I completely advocate for drafting players you enjoy watching and you will be more interested in. I watch Red Zone every week just to see highlights of the players that I want, and I will go out and search for highlights of players I particularly want to do well, or I've got a vested interest in because either I like their playing style, I have a vested interest in them because of fantasy, or other reasons as well. And I think to extend that as well, if you're in multiple leagues, don't worry about drafting the same guy in multiple leagues. Unless you're a professional, and I'm not a professional, I play in a lot of leagues, but I'm not a professional by far. See each league in isolation and try and win each league in isolation rather than trying to win on average. Winning on average is like, oh, well, I entered 15 leagues and I won 2 of them. Who cares? You entered 15 leagues, you lost 13. what each person in the, and you're probably playing against different guys. 10 guys you're playing against in this league, the 11 guys playing in this league, the 15 guys playing, the 7 guys playing in this league, they only care about that league. So make sure you can win that league. Don't try and spread your odds. Say, well, I've drafted a bit too much of DK, so maybe I should go for a bit of Keenan Allen here. It's not going to be fun. So draft the players you like, and that will lead to a much better experience viewing and playing the sport of kings that we call fantasy football. So that's my top 10 tips, and this has been a spotted history of my mock drafts over the last few weeks that you've probably seen a lot of. Tomorrow, or over the next couple of days, I will release a full draft history. If you haven't caught any of the draft episode, there will be a 4+ hour episode where I will do. We'll have this kind of recap built into it, but I will, bring you back all the content that you might have missed. I'll chop it down a little bit so it's a bit more consumptive. But if you are stuck for something to do and you have half a day to spend watching me, or you just want to, go to certain bits, I'll make sure it's chopped up in chapters as well. You can go view that. If you've watched this far, thank you so much. If you listen this far, again, thank you, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, wherever you listen, or YouTube if you watch this. Really appreciate it. I think this one was probably better on a visual medium, but during the season, I think we're not going to discriminate between the two. This is very much more of an experimental format. If you've enjoyed, follow us on the socials at Rugby with Pads. We're everywhere. And if you fancy getting yourself some merch, we are hopefully going to release some new merch before the start of the season. I think so, yeah. So a top like this with Rugby with Pads, or we might do some personalised gear for your league as well. We're looking at that in Etsy shops. Go to rugbywithpads.com. You can find everything there. I'll leave you be to the rest of your day. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you on the virtual gridiron.